Kia ora tātou katoa, he mihi mai o kia koutou. Today we've got a really exciting webinar, an opportunity for yourselves as very busy organisations to look at what is research, how can you harness free research expertise for your organisation, and what can we learn from both the NGO sector and also our very special guest, John Stansfield. Today I just want to connect us all to the amazing speaker. John has had years of experience in conducting research for community organisations in Aotearoa. He is a lecturer at the Department of Social Practice in Unitec and Deputy Editor of Whanake, the Pacific Journal of Community Development. Tātou katoa, kia ora John, welcome.
Kia ora Kaye-Maree, thank you for having me.
Awesome. Look, we've got a few guests joining us today, but we also will have quite a few that will review this video in their own time. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. What's your story, John?
Well, I come from glorious sunny Waiheke Island, off the coast of Auckland. I'm a senior lecturer in community development, and I have a life sentence in the community and voluntary sector as an activist, as a supporter, as a manager, as a leader. I founded the graduate program in not-for-profit management, led that for 10 years, led a big social enterprise in rubbish, and led the Problem Gambling Foundation before becoming too old for useful work and returning to academia where it's no object to advancement.
Hey, look, I think that's really important. That you've done full circle, similar to your to the rubbish journey, right? Is that it has a purpose, and then what do we do with it next? And so perhaps you re-entering into the academic circles is about giving credence to you living and doing your work on the front line, and then bringing back this academic rigor and theoretical practice and joining the dots. So it's really awesome to have you join us today, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about you. Just to let everybody know today, this is going to be an open conversation with John. We're also going to be joined by a special guest from the NGO sector who's going to talk to us about how she's applied research to her work. So my very first question for you, John, is really, from your experience, where do you believe or what do you think research is, actually, just right from the start, real basics?
Oh, look, thank you. And it's an evolving thing for me. I guess I have some wonderful tupuna to thank for that. First of all, there was Grandad. And, you know, before Google, there was Grandad. There was a place that you could go where you could ask all kinds of questions, and he would figure out some way of finding the answers to those and tell you. Later, I was very fortunate to have two fabulous men who have now passed on my board. One of them was Gordon Hodson, who went on to be the head chair of the board, but also he was the head chemist for ICI, and just an incredibly learned man. He taught himself planning law. He taught himself genetics. He was just a fantastic source of inspiration. And alongside him, the very recently passed George Blanchard, who was a senior lecturer in mechanical engineering at the University of Auckland and responsible for creating a whole bunch of research partnerships that I got dragged into and involved in, where George was freeing up university resources for community use. So those people are in my background, but in the foreground, there's a woman called Sandra, who was my lecturer in research in postgraduate when I was in the States. And she was a big American PhD in agriculture. And she came into class the first day in her bib overalls and said, "Research means finding stuff out and telling folks about it." And I thought that was a really accessible definition. And I think about it quite a lot. And I think, you know, often we're really good at finding stuff out and not very good at telling folks about it. So I try to bring some storytelling craft to my particular approach to research.
I like the thought of it being really simplified, that research is an opportunity to find out, dig deep, be a bit of an explorer, and then let people know. I think that is a really important point. And so, with all of the people that have inspired you, especially with that level of brilliance right across sectors, from building partnerships to understanding genetics to the sciences, how does all of that influence you to explore experimental research and what that means to you?
All right. Well, I didn't spend a lot of time in white coats in the labs, but I kind of love experiment as well. And my kids have recently disclosed that they figured out that we were hippies because we grew up in the bush without electricity and the wood stove and miles of patchouli and tie-dyed muslin. And they tell stories from that period. And one of them was I went on a tour down to the South Island and I picked up some of those fabulous Roxburgh apricots. And anyone from the South Island, you're so lucky to live there. Those are the best apricots in the world, the big blood red apricots. Absolutely fantastic, almost wiped out by the supermarket industry and by globalization. And our stores are now flooded with these pale, rubbery, tasteless little Turkish apricots. No offense to my Turkish friends. Anyway, I bought these apricots. I brought them home and I thought I'll do an experiment on this. So I put them on the bench alongside the Turkish ones, and I got Matariki, my daughter, who was then, I think, about 4 or 5, and I said, "You are my best scientist. I want you to conduct experiments and tell me what is the difference between these 2 apricots." So she sniffed the apricots and she poked them and she pulled them and she licked them and she cut them and she took a bit off and chewed them and she held them up to the light, and then her face just lit up and she said, "Ha ha ha, I know the answer." And pointing at the Turkish apricot, she said, "These ones are free range." So that's experiment. You don't necessarily come up with the answer everyone was thinking, but I liked it. It was a great experiment.
And so, how do you apply that to some of the work that you've been involved in so far, and really kind of hoping for an answer or feeling that you might have a bit of a hunch, but perhaps the answers are completely different to what you expected?
Sure. Look, in 1995, I met a guy called Tim McMains on a beach in Auckland, and we were both mid-career community organisation people. He'd had a much bigger career in the States. And we talked about the problems that community organisations face. And we really just struck it off. We really got into that conversation together, and it carried on. It carried on for weeks. And the conclusion of the conversation, which hasn't actually concluded really, we decided that we would develop a new theory of community organisations and what they might look like, what they might do, what their place in the world was, and what they might need from education. So I came into Unitec. I met with Gavin Rennie, who was the head of school, a lifelong friend who I'd been a community worker with in South Auckland. I said, "I think we're interested in finding out if people want a new type of education in the community and voluntary sector." And he gave me some space to go away and do some research. And we interviewed 66 organisations, and we talked to the volunteers, the people on the board, the managers, staff at various levels, and just had these great conversations. And one of the real things that we were asking them about was what was their desire? What did they most want next from education? And what had their experience been of trying to have that need met? And that was fascinating. And it really informed for me an idea which I've continued to pursue all my life, which is that we might be culturally different as a sector. We might be completely culturally different. And I remember the woman from South Auckland telling me that she was struggling through an MBA because she thought we really needed to be more businesslike in the sector and she needed to learn about that. But she said, these people are not our people. They're nice people, but After class, they go down to Chin Chin on Kaye for cocktails, and I'm getting the bus back to Māngere, hoping I've got enough money left to get fish and chips for the kids because it'll be too late to cook. We are from a different place. And so we went out and we asked lots of those people what they wanted, and they were very generous in telling us what they wanted and what they didn't want. And then we designed a piece of education around that ended up being taught all around the Pacific and all around New Zealand until the madness that was Unitec's transformation shut it down last year. So in that case, that initial piece of research sponsored for me a whole line of inquiry about our sector and how it works, and then we built tools out of that knowledge. And I think, research can be really big and it can be really expensive. It can take years and years, and sometimes it can be cheap and quick and dirty and just as impactful.
With those questions and that line of inquiry, what were some of the key feedback points that the community were letting you know so that you could design a program that was going to meet their needs?
Oh, sure. They said, look, I need to eat this meal one bite at a time. Don't imagine for a moment that I'm coming in here to sit in your classroom every Thursday and Friday for 14 weeks a term. My world doesn't work like that. It's chaotic. It's mad. I need to have a piece of learning when I need that piece of learning most and when I can cram it in at the time. So you break this up into nice little bits and pieces that don't look anything like university courses, and you have them available in different places and at different times so I can get them, and don't bother trying to put anything on in the school holidays because I've got kids to look after.
And so can you just tell us more about what were the elements of the program that you taught? And really interested because if you designed it around those that worked in the community, in particular in the not-for-profit sector, what were the key elements of all the modular pieces that you had that you thought, actually, these are the most fundamental pieces of knowledge and tools that will really support you to flourish in the community sector?
Sure. Well, the thing is a beast of its time. So you imagine you're in the middle of 96, you are confronted by what was then the Community Funding Agency, which research tells us was the most hated funding agency government ever made. In fact, it was actually disliked more by the people it gave money to than the ones who didn't get it, because the former had to have an ongoing relationship. So you're in a period where there's a kind of a tidal wave of management theory coming across largely from white men in Boston on how the world should work, and government agencies eagerly picking up this notion that we must be more businesslike and forcing it through contracting regimes on community organisations. So the first thing that we did was we theorised that community organisations were fundamentally different because they had a single competitive advantage, and that was the ability to excite in people a passion around shared values. And it's that passion that begets voluntarism, why people give time. No one gives time to Telecom or to the government. And it's that passion that begets philanthropy. So people don't freely donate to the government or to Telecom either. So we're in this kind of unique space where that alignment between passion and values is really the guider for the organisation. So we have to build all of our management and leadership processes and theories around that. So whether we're doing fundraising or we're doing employee management or we're doing volunteer management or even how we're constructing our accounts actually has to rest on that very, very strong kaupapa of values and values alignment.
Interesting. And so if values were the key fundamentals that underpinned your program, and if we harken back to 1996, which is quite a different time to where we are today, and there have been so many shifts and changes around contracting, relationships, high trust contracts, community-led development, collective impact. These are all generally new, probably quite old practices, here in Aotearoa. What it sounds like to me is how you really build on faith, good faith, and love. Like, how do those actually influence the way that a community organisation that might exist on the memory of the smell of an oily rag, whereas in actuality it is the binder that enables them to do their mahi well, is love, goodwill, the ability to work harder and on very little. So how did you work with those fundamentals in your program?
Sure. So it really is about establishing those values that we have, and then how we protect and grow those. So I began to wonder after a while if the most endangered thing that we had around us was not Hochester's frog, but a diversity in how we know and understand and decide things. And I think I often observe in the community sector ways of knowing and understanding and deciding which are unique, which are very consensual, which are generous in the way that we work. And so the importance of preserving those things which are our cultural heritage as a sector. And that means being able to name them and being able to put a theory and a model around them, and then put them up and say, well, these are actually as good as any of the other things that are around. And I remember one spectacular day I had the fabulous Mike Smith, who went on to be very famous around the top of One Tree Hill, and also later with Whanau Apanui and the deep sea drilling protests. And Mike had come to teach a lecture alongside me, which we deliberately decided to show the world in contrast. And so at one end of the room, I went and put up on the whiteboard the Harvard program on negotiation of "This is how you solve conflict." And at the other end of the room, Mike put up on board, "This is a tikanga Māori approach for how you might resolve conflict." And these things were 180 degrees out on every point. They were completely at polar opposites, which threw the class into the most fabulous confusion. And we said, okay, so how do we solve conflict in our organisations? Where does that fit culturally? If this was a continuum from one end of the class to the other, where do we fit? And of course, it's not a straight line continuum. It goes all over the place. But people had their organisations in different places at different times, and had an understanding that they had their own traditions and their own tikanga for how they solve those problems inside the organisation, sometimes successfully and sometimes not so successfully. So this was an example of us trying to give voice and value to the customs which had worked and enabled us to work in the communities where we work.
And so how have you found in your experience of delivering programs like this, how would you fit in aspects around treaty-based frameworks, unconscious bias, gender diversity, diversity in thinking? Because if we think about organisations that are delivering programs to community, with community, and we look at research, again, if research is the lens that we see the world, and that is also the lens that we take with us when we're exploring and asking questions, how do you bring in these other dimensions which also impact the way that a program is delivered, but also who receives service and who might not, based on some of these aspects?
Look, I think one of the best examples I've seen of using two tiny little bits of research to seriously challenge established order recently, and it's findable, we should put it up on the site later, is the debate between Don Brash and Simon Wilson in the Weekend Herald a couple of weeks ago, where Simon uses two really small, very simple statistics to go, you know what, if these things are true, if Māori median income and Māori assets are this much lower than Pākehā, then it's just not really feasible, Don, to talk about yourself being stripped of rights. You know, it's not really feasible to try and make this into a free speech argument. Well, there's endless opportunities to use research. If we go back to the 90s, the New Perspectives on Race program, and the thing that Ray and Mitzi Nairn did called The Figures Tell the Story, using the evidence of the criminal justice system as the evidence of failure, which is surfacing again as we speak.
Okay, and so this is a really good opportunity now to just talk briefly around of all the things that you learned in the not-for-profit, because it sounds like it was a real loss to our communities that this program has been discontinued. But what are the 3 gems that you really got in relation to research and how people grew their thinking and their exploration? What were those 3 gems in relation to this program?
You know, that's a piece of research that we want to do, that we've been talking about doing, is what is the thing that lasts. I think probably for me, it was the awakening of a critical thinking. And if I come back to that notion that research can be really big or it can be little and dirty, and it can just illuminate just as much. I recall taking over as the chief executive of the Problem Gambling Foundation in 2003. And the organisation was absolutely mired in controversy. There were allegations of mismanagement. There were 2 offices in Auckland that couldn't talk to each other. There was a very large grant, the proceeds of which had been spent and the work hadn't yet been commenced. And there'd been a series of pretty rapid changes of accountants. So the rules, the levers, if you like, of the organisation, which was primarily a counselling organisation, weren't working. So I've got the flash shoot, I've got the big office, I'm the chief executive, I've got no idea where this thing is going to go to, and there's lots of stuff to fix, boring management stuff to fix, accounts and that kind of stuff. So I decided what I would do is each day I would read for 3 or 4 hours everything I could find on gambling, and that was really interesting, because at least a half of it was written, funded by the gambling industry. So it had that kind of general validity and tone of 1950s tobacco research. We really can't be sure what's going on. It's probably the smoker's fault, but we need more money for research, that kind of thing. Anyway, I'm working away in the office in Grafton one night, and I came across one tiny little statistic, and it said in 2003, more than half the people seeking treatment for gambling harm were women. Oh, well, that's okay. We understand that. Women are good help seekers. They're better at it than men. When I look back, 10 years earlier, no New Zealand women were seeking help. So the question you then have to start asking yourself is, what happened to New Zealand women that they suddenly became so feeble and weak that they were trapped by a gambling machine? And I personally have absolutely no experience of feeble and weak New Zealand women. I tend to end up with the much mouthier, stroppier ones. The day may yet come. It could be a joy yet in store. But it just didn't gel. I couldn't understand it. And I'm looking at this problem through the lens of the addictions paradigm. And addictions looks at the harm that has happened after it has happened and makes the locus of concern the person who was harmed. So what happens there is that we take any one of us and put us in a room, put 3 psychologists in white coats around us, they're going to find something that was the matter with us, There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in, as Leonard would have it. So it just didn't make sense to me. And I began to pull the wool and find out what was going on. The next thing I found was that 87%, more than 93% in the case of Indigenous women, but 7% of women had a primary problem with a single product, and that was a pokie machine. Now, I have another life where I was a trade union official, and I reflected on that. If I went out to a sawmill and there was 3 guys sitting around with their arms cut off, my first response probably would not be to put them into a support group and say, now, come on, yous blokes. What went wrong in your early life that you all wanted to cut your arms off? But that's exactly what we were doing to gamblers. And so all of our orientation was demand side. It must be the people that are in fault. And it became obvious to me that we needed to think about supply side, that in fact, the normal outcome of regular use of this machine is that it will harm you. So the problem is not the user of the machine, the problem is the machine. Now, that caused an absolute revolution in the organisation and across the gambling sector. And we really started to frame up a public health approach to gambling. And you can see that today in the fact that the regular surveys by the Department of Internal Affairs show that most Kiwis know these things are really dangerous, and most Kiwis don't think this is a great way to raise money for the community. And you're now seeing the flow-on effect into the supply of alcohol, particularly the low-price ready-to-drinks, etc. So tiny little piece of research pulling away at a ball of wool and really reorientated a major issue.
That's a really important point. I think how that one little statistic blew out into something else. I think it's important for our viewers to consider is where do we look? What kind of questions might we ask? And when we do ask those questions, what does it uncover? And for you, that had quite a transformational impact on your organisation and your approach. And we do have a question from one of our viewers today, and she asks, what are some tips and tricks on how to get researchers to support your organisation for free or at low cost? What are some ideas that you have for them?
Fantastic, and it's a great question, and we're right at that point, really. Look, there's this incredible mismatch that goes on. If you think about who benefits most out of research, that would have to be large universities who get terrific grants to study things. It was more than $1 million grant went out for universities to study partnerships for community organisations, and we all took our sandwiches and our brown paper bags from Mangere to go in to be the focus group and got the bus home again, and the university sat there with the $1 million. But in any institution which teaches a degree program or higher has a requirement in order to get its own funding that its staff are research active in the field that they're working in. So that means that the people in the research institute have to do research. And actually the best kind of research to do is research that might be useful. I'm doing some research with a colleague in the early childhood sector at the moment where we're looking at what is it that early childhood teachers actually do? Because when we really understand what it is that they do, then we understand what it is that they need to have to be able to do that in terms of skills and knowledge and education. And then we can run a case on why aren't they paid for that. And so we've got as a partner with that the New Zealand Education Institute, which is the union for those people, has said, come and give us a hand. So I found a little grant for that to pay for the researchers' time. The union found a little bit of money so that we can get to a conference together and publish the work together and make it valuable. Really, really cheap and cheerful. So first of all, knowing the fact that people need to know stuff and need to be doing research is really important. Secondly, the community sector provides an enormous amount of value to tertiary institutions. In the organisation where I'm sitting at the moment, in 2015, we had 96,000 hours of teaching provided for free by people in community organisations who were taking social work students on placements and taking counselling students on placements. Now, under that kind of arrangement, I think you have a real right to say, well, actually, we want some help with our stuff as well. Often, the academics are really scratching and wondering what it is they can do their research on. When I came here in 2013, this department wasn't research active. So we had some people doing some good research, but many people were not doing anything at all. And so I just said, well, we're going to do research, folks. We're going to do it for the community sector, and we're just going to get on and do it as if we were the community sector, absolutely on the cheap, and we're not going to charge people. Let's get into it. From that, we had things, I think one of the first ones was a chance conversation in the queue at Piratahi Marae on Waitangi Day in the queue for the hangi with somebody who was a volunteer at the Peace Foundation who said, we'd really love to know what happened to all the people who were our peer mediators. I said, oh, yeah, why would you like to know that? And they said, well, we'd like to know whether our stuff works, but we think there might be some amazing stories there about transformation. So I brokered a deal with Dr. Helene Connor, who's a fantastic writer, and she worked away with the Peace Foundation, didn't cost the Peace Foundation a bean, and wrote a impressive report, which is up there on the Unitec website, on where those people went, where those kids who were trained to be peer mediators in the playground went. One of them's running a City of London law firm's mediation division. Another, who was destined to be a gang prospect, has just written a book on Māori approaches to mediation. There's just really, really stunning stories that the Peace Foundation can then use when it's talking to people who would like to join its board, who would like to be supporters financially, when it's talking to government about its value, when it's talking to other young people about what's the point of being a peer mediator. Great, really great opportunities, I think. Get out and ask. Go make friends at the polytechs, particularly. They're very under-researched, and the universities. Look for the department where you have a natural alignment.
That's a really good point around how to engage researchers. In my experience, I watch an organisation called Ngā Pai o Te Maramatanga, who sponsor researchers to undertake work, and they have open grant funds. I think it's important to keep an eye on those things. Really building relationships with different departments, and just asking, look, we've got some really great opportunities for research, and really the research is about creating the evidence base to validate the way that you're doing your work. And so how can a strategic partnership with a tertiary provider really support you? And most people will look at the big four, Auckland, Canterbury, Otago, Victoria, but also there is rich diversity in even the Māori institutions, such as Te Wānanga o Raukawa,
Sure.
Awanuiarangi, who've got a real great handle on kaupapa Māori models of practice. So if you've got some wonderful examples of research opportunities, and I definitely suggest two things. Have a look at the tertiary institutions, have a look at those that provide funding, because then if you can partner with somebody that can write your application, that's going to work for you. And then thirdly, what about the Māori institutions? Can they support you in your bid? And then finally, really being super clear about what you're trying to achieve. I think those things are really important as a community development specialist working on the ground with your communities. Is it's a massive X factor that you have by really understanding the realities that they face every day, and that it is about showing that what you do not just matters, but it's actually making a difference. And what impact are you having as a result of your work? That leads us into our very next piece, because we also believe it's really important to have the voice of the community sector represented in these conversations. So what we'd love to do is play a wee video of one of our stunning community organisations that wanted to share her insights with us around resources and what is important.
Hi, my name's Cheryl Martin, and I'm the General Manager for Volunteering Auckland, and I've been asked to talk to you today about our experience of engaging with research with our organisation. We have known and respected John Stansfield for a large number of years, and in particular, I'd like to talk about the relationship we have with him through his connections with Unitec. We have undertaken a number of projects in partnership with his students, and we have enjoyed the process very much. It was easy to get started. All I did was said, "Hey, John, I've got a question and there's something that I need to know. Who have you got?" And we would just have a bit of a discussion and go from there.
Awesome. Cheryl is also going to share some insights into what are the kinds of resources and time required to make research work for her and her organisation.
So why do we keep coming back to having research done? Well, the benefits are phenomenal. We're able to tell our stories. We're able to show our stories and showcase our stories through the written word, through video, through research papers. We have so many more. We have so many more questions that we want answered. For example, we know that 30% of all volunteers in this country are male, 70% female. And it's the same through Volunteering Auckland, 30% male, 70% female. Why? Why is it that males aren't volunteering as often or as much as females are? So that's a piece of work we want to look at. The other one we're looking at is around young people, 13 to 18-year-olds. We know that a large number of that age group come through us looking for opportunities to volunteer, but have the lowest placement rate of actually starting in a voluntary role within one of our member organisations. So why is that? Why are community groups reluctant or appear to be reluctant to take on 13 to 18-year-olds as volunteers? What is it that's stopping them? What is it that we can do to help them? So that's absolutely another question that we've got that we want the answers to. So we will be looking for someone to help us research that. And some final comments. I would absolutely encourage you, whether you're a large organisation or a small one with no paid staff or one or two, just a small team, to absolutely, if you've got questions that you want to know the answers to, then contact your local volunteer centre or your local educational institute to find someone who's probably thinking along the same lines and really wants to know the answers as well, and you can work together in finding out the answers. I would absolutely highly recommend having somebody research with you.
Awesome. That just aligns perfectly with what we were just talking about, John, around the importance of building partnerships and relationships with community. So any thoughts on her comments there, John?
Oh, look, first of all, I have to say, Cheryl is a fabulous human being. She's lying at home after major back surgery, and still she comes out to play. In fact, we've done such a lot of interesting things with Cheryl that we're going to put out a special edition of Whanake, the Pacific Journal of Community Development, later this year, probably November, December, centred on volunteering, because there's so much really good work that's been done. I guess when we're thinking about the things that we might want to do, we tend to think about, well, it'll be a survey or that kind of thing. But actually, sometimes it's incredibly practical stuff that we need to find out. And I'm going to tell you about the research process that my community organisation went through to develop a process that we're calling spinning rubbish into gold. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the steps that we went to.
It's really strong. This could be our bus stops, it could be our vineyard fence posts, there's all kinds of uses in agriculture. ECB, or engineered composite board, is made out of rubbish and it's a way of incorporating fibre into plastics that would otherwise go to waste and making useful products. We're spinning rubbish into gold. We built a beautiful raised bed garden, concrete boxing, fantastic compost bin. The list of products we could build with this is endless. In fact, we might not have enough rubbish. The stuff that's in it is truly horrific or wonderful, depending on your point of view. The old polystyrene meat tray, the dirty coffee cup you had at lunch, you used toothpaste tube, a chippy wrapper, some biscuit wrap, a broken wheelie bin, some old pipe, bits of bamboo, even tantalised timber, which is really dangerous stuff because you can't burn it and you can't bury it. All of that goes into the mix to make a strong, durable board which you can use for all kinds of purposes and which can be finished with simple hand tools. This has been an amazing collaboration, initially with the University of Auckland, and then we got John Sadler from JTech Industries involved. The guy's a very senior plastics engineer with a factory and all the toys and all the tools, and that's how we've been able to produce this fantastic new product. Our initial project was to build a compost bin. Then we started to play with raised bed gardens, and the latest iteration is a concrete edging, a concrete boxing replacement that you can leave in situ. We could be building perhaps John Key's cycleways from Kaitaia to Bluff using this stuff on the edge. The engineered composite board project is nearing the end of its third year of development. We're absolutely ready now to scale that right up. We could be turning that into jobs and sustainable products that we can use in our own community and which communities all over New Zealand could be doing. And we could be taking 60% out of the waste stream. That's 60% that's currently going off in compactor trucks, going off to town and going into a hole in the ground. Landfills are a limited resource and they're pretty unsafe as well. We could be building our bus shelters, we could be building our wharves out of this. Imagine a vineyard with posts made out of rubbish.
Different man there, John. You look completely different.
So that's my community going, what the hell are we going to do with all this plastic and how are we going to find out? And the way we found out is I got invited to go to the engineering school at the University of Auckland and have a bit of a talk about rubbish. So I took 2 bags of rubbish with me and I said, my generation has failed to come up with a smart solution for this stuff, people. So I really need you to come up with it. And I tipped them on the floor. I said, I'll see you in about 6 weeks when you've got some ideas. And I came back in 6 weeks and they had some crazy ideas and some not so crazy ideas. And one of those ideas said, let's see how we could turn this stuff into a building product. And we got a small team of engineering students who worked with our organisation to come up with an initial product. Then we took that out to a plastics manufacturer to take it to the next stage. Then we went back to the university and asked them to help us with some other technical issues we had about how to make the plant accessible and transportable. And we are hoping to have a factory up to do that over the summer this year. So, watch the space. We might become rubbish millionaires out of that.
Awesome. Hey, look, everyone, I just wanted to give us an opportunity to wrap up our session today. There are a couple of things that we wanted to really connect with. Firstly, the elements around research. What I heard from you is the importance of asking a really good question.
Yep.
I think that was something that came out. So what is your questions? How can you be an explorer and use that exploratory question to help share people what you learn with others, what you learn as a result. So that's what I understood the importance and the purpose of research being. The second one that I heard as well is how can we engage people to support us in our research quest? And again, it's been consistently fed back in our session today, the importance of building strategic relationships and partnerships, either with institutions, researchers, or other organisations, particularly funders, to see how can we utilise our own expertise as community development workers, as well as that of the research experts or theorists as well. So I heard that was really important. And then thirdly, it was really interesting, John, to hear your insights on how you were able to take your questions from those that lived in the community and those that actually work with us every day to help design a program that would give people tools and support to help them on their journey of becoming more effective as managers of not-for-profits. And then finally, how you've been able to apply this experimental approach to research, not only with your own daughter, but also in trying to figure out how do we solve this issue of plastic in our waterways and create clean streams. So I think those are really, really interesting insights that you gave us on this journey. Are there any other key points that you think are really important for our not-for-profit sector?
Thank you, Kaye-Maree. And you said the magic F word in there in quite a kind way, really, that funder word. I think the next big piece of research that we need to do, and I've been working on this for a year now, unfortunately we didn't get the little bit of funding that might have helped it happen, but the next big piece of research we need to do is we need to, as a community sector, be evaluating the performance of funders. And that's a project that I hope to kick off, and perhaps we'll have another webinar on how we could all collaborate around doing that, so that we're able to give very clear feedback to funders on how well they are performing in terms of the issues which matter most to us and to the communities which we serve.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So I think that wraps us up for today. John, thank you so much for your time. What I do want to encourage everybody that's watching today is to please go to our Community Research Facebook page. If you have any specific questions, we're going to invite John to head across over there shortly, and that can be where you can have a one-to-one or one-to-many conversation if you've got any questions that pop up. Cheryl will also be joining John as well. So Cheryl from Volunteer Auckland will be present, as well as an opportunity for you to link up with our very rich resources. Please go to our website. Inside of that has how to go about building research, who are some evaluators and researchers that you might want to partner with and support you in your work, as well as some other really, really great videos of previous webinars that we've hosted, and other informational webinars that you might find useful as well. So on behalf of our team, we'd love to thank you, John, thank Janet and Nukulasa and David, who are behind the scenes trying to make things tick really nicely. To our 40 plus viewers today, thank you so much for taking time with us and hearing John's story. And if you have any other requirements from us, please let us know. And do you have any wrap-up thoughts, John, for our viewers today?
Well, I'll just thank you all. Keep thinking about research is actually your right, and there's a whole public institution out there whose job it is to serve the community. So approach it from a rights-based perspective, and with all of my bright students and clever colleagues and all of the communities that you serve, will make something really nice.
You're awesome. Kia ora, John. Thank you so much. I know how busy you are. Not only is he working full-time, but he's also working full-time on a PhD. And as well as that, doing, I'm certain, all sorts of really exciting things across Tāmaki and other areas of the community. So we appreciate your time, John. Thank you so much for being with us today. If you want more information about who we are and what we do, please head across to the What Works website, and inside of there we'll have a whole bunch of tools, tips, tricks, and opportunities for you to really develop your research skills within your organisation. Nō reire hoa mā, thank you so much for your time. Take care, enjoy today. Hopefully it's sun shining, and if it isn't, enjoy the company of good friends and the people that you serve. Mauri ora ki a tātou. Ka kite. Kia ora, John.